So hello everyone today. Thank you so much for joining us for this presentation. My name is Suzanne Ryan Ibarra and I'm joined by Kylie Gallington in the room. We are working with Sue to evaluate the work that she's been doing with all of you as Accelerator sites. And we are based at Survey Research and Evaluation Group, which is also a Public Health Institute program. And I'm sure we've interacted with many of you already throughout the course of the CACHI project. And today our goal is to share the baseline data that's been collected for all of the Accelerator sites. So we'll be sharing two types of data with you today. The first one is the partnership survey. And this survey was conducted to capture broad baseline information from each of the Accelerator sites, including information on the backbone organization, the steering committee, and the ACH partners. You may remember completing this. We sent emails asking all of you, the site leads, to complete the survey between February and May of 2018, and it was via SurveyMonkey link. When we got the results back from all the questions you answered, we calculated some percentages and then we scaled the responses. We did this because some sites had a lot more participants in the survey than others. So you can see on this slide that participation in the partnership survey was very high. For one site in particular, which was Stu Kincaid's site over there, Fresno County, 55 completes.
Yeah, that's crazy. 55.
You had a very broad representation of partners. Other sites, had have between 4 and 8. But the most important thing that we can get from this slide is that every site participated in the survey at least once. So it provided us some important baseline information that we'll use to measure progress over time. So as all of you know, each site is focused on at least 2 definitional elements. So because you're only focusing on 2 definitional elements, we want to make sure to measure progress on that element. So that's why I included this slide, just to remind us of your focus. Some sites are overachieving and are focused on more than 2 definitional elements. And the most common definitional elements are data analytics and capacity and shared vision and goals. I'm going to move this.
Click that little to the far.
Which, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to adjust so you can see the screen a little bit better. Okay. So here we've calculated something that we're calling domain averages. So as you can see on the y-axis, these are scores that are calculated from your site representative's responses to each of the definitional element domains. So we have wellness fund, data and metrics, portfolio of interventions, collaboration, and vision. So the bar in blue represents all of the sites, and the bar in red represents the sites that are focusing on this definitional element or domain. So we're hoping that this figure will show progress. And the scale right now is from 1 being haven't started working on this yet to 4 being we have achieved this. So you can see looking at this data that none of the sites on average have achieved any of these definitional elements yet. However, for portfolio of interventions, collaboration, and vision, the scores are around 2, so that means making a little bit of progress. So good job. And data and metrics and wellness fund, the scores range from 1 to 2. So progress is a little slower in those areas, but that's to be expected at this point. So I also wanted to show these other averages, which are for leadership team and backbone. So you'll see here that the sites that are, when we look at the sites just working on these, the scores are around 2. which is around between disagree and agree, because this is an agree scale. But again, this is just the baseline information, so we'll be expecting to see some progress after the initiative is over. So at this point, what I'll do is show you the input data that went into each of those domain scores. And the first domain or definition element I will talk about is shared vision and goals. So here you see the results for all of the sites combined. And what we'll be sharing with you after this call today is the results just for your sites. So here you can see that most of the sites are making a lot of progress on finalizing the vision statement with a score of 3.0. And I know that's something that you've been working on very closely with Sue for now. You can see the scores are slightly lower for aligning with partners and other stakeholders around community-oriented goals and communicating the vision to the community at large, but still in the ballpark of making a little progress. And the quotes you see on the slide as well are quotes from the survey participants that we thought would be relevant to share here. The first one, it seems intimidating to the group to land on one vision, which has been somewhat of an impediment to starting somewhere. Another participant said our vision is established and shared by our partnership. So the next domain we'll talk about today is collaboration, which I think in some ways is also talked about as partnership. We're still finalizing how we refer to this definitional element. There are a lot of questions asked about this, and you see that the weighted averages range between the high ones, a 1.9, the score for openly addressing and managing conflict among partner organizations, which means we're making a little progress, to 3.2, which is the question related to successfully identifying and engaging a set of key partner organizations. So I think you all are making a little bit of progress in this area. The quotes for this definition element, I'll just read here. It's still a fairly insular process with pretty much the usual suspects at the table, far too intent on avoiding healthy conflict and aggressively challenging the status quo paradigm. So that was a survey participant that was relating that information to us. And another quote, I'm proud of the broad spectrum of partners in our group. It's not always perfect, but we aren't afraid of conflict. We work through it. So the next definition element we'll talk about here is not actually a definition element. These questions refer to the overall model of an ACH. And here I'll just mention that the questions talked about supporting communities of color, becoming a nimble and responsive entity, convincing partner organizations to commit resources. So the weighted averages for this question ranged from the high ones to the low twos, which means pretty much between haven't started working on it yet and making a little progress. So there's a lot of room for improvement in these questions as well. I'll read the quotes now. The first one from survey participants is a structure that allows community members to play a meaningful role in the ACH is something that is being discussed now, but a group has not come to agreement on it. And the next quote is not clear how community members play a meaningful role in this process or how communities of color are supported to take on lead roles. So I know there's been a lot of equity and diversity training that's been going on lately. So hopefully we'll see some movement in these areas when we measure at our follow-up survey. So the next definitional element that we'll discuss is portfolio of interventions. And for this, pretty much the weighted averages were in the low twos. So it means that the sites reported, you all reported that you're making a little progress. However, one quote, steady and strong with progress. Another quote, not very keen on the portfolio and what it consists of. So that's definitely something that seems that's still being worked out. So the next definition element that we'll discuss is data and metrics. And I believe 7 of the 9 sites are focusing on this as a definitional element. It's the most common definitional element that you all are working on. And it seems like there's a lot of progress to be made in this definition element. The weighted averages hover around the high ones and the low twos, meaning that the sites are reporting not working on this or making just a little progress. So a lot to still improve in this area. So one of the quotes I'll read is that the group is still unable to decide on metrics, let alone collect data, analyze it, and be held accountable to these results. We have a long way to go. Another quote is, data is collected and shared, however, regular progress reports are not captured. So there's a lot of progress to be made in this definition element. This definition element that I'll touch on here is the wellness fund. And this definition element was had on average the lowest weighted averages. So there's a lot of progress to be made for this element still. These weighted averages are hovering in the mid ones. So we're between having started working on this and making a little progress. The quotes, I'll read the first one now. A few members of the ACH are working on this, but it's so early in the research that they haven't communicated their findings to the larger group. And the second quote is, our members agree that the wellness fund is one of the highest priorities for us. So I know the work is happening, but at the baseline, it was just starting to be shown. So now this element is leadership and governance. And this was measured using a slightly different scale than the previous questions. It was using an agree-Likert scale. So we saw that the survey participants on the whole strongly agreed that the leadership team is steering the ACH in the right direction, and the leadership team includes partner organizations in decision making. So you all are making a lot of good work in this area already at baseline. However, some of the quotes, and I'll read the first one now, called out a few things. For example, I think intentions are good, but willingness to actively engage and challenge the status quo or shake things up is just not evident. Another quote was, they are trying hard with the little they have. Site lead is stretched too thin and has had a learning curve that understandably has slowed things down. Other survey participants said they love where we are headed. And the final quote I'll read is, I don't know enough to give an answer. So some people seem to be a little confused about the leadership team and what was going on. So in summary, the partnership survey allowed us to measure the baseline activity in the definitional elements that are very important for the CACHI work that you are all doing. So we saw very strong scores so far in the vision, collaboration, leadership, and governance definitional elements. And we identified that there are areas for growth, particularly around the portfolio of interventions, the data and metrics, and the wellness fund definitional elements. So we are looking forward to measuring these with you at a later date. We are planning to administer the same partnership survey again, most likely in the fall, to see how much progress has been made and to measure the elements that you all are working very hard to develop with Sue. So you can look forward to that. And you can also look forward to receiving your own personalized partnership survey results for your sites. We'll be sharing those with you shortly. But now I'm going to turn it over to my colleague. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Hey, it's Sue. I was wondering if you feel prepared to just maybe briefly highlight the catalyst. You know, I think we've seen a little bit because they did the same survey. And so I don't know if you just want to, because I know, there's that group, this group, they've been going a little bit longer. I don't know if you have any, I know I didn't ask you to do this ahead of time. I was just thinking as you were talking that it might be helpful if there's anything that you can recall or reflect to share with the group, just in terms of how they came out as compared to, not that there's a comparison, but maybe just have some reference point.
I can share that I am familiar with the Catalyst data. So the reason why we asked you to do this partnership survey is because the Catalyst sites also participate in it. So because we are hoping to have a cohesive message for the entire CACHI initiative, it's important that we collect data using the same tool, at least for some of the measurements. So the Catalyst sites did overall score slightly higher on those baseline scores for their partnership survey. And we believe that that is because they have more resources to start out with. Catalyst sites are typically larger organizations, and they are receiving a lot more funding than newer sites are. So is that what you were hoping I would comment on?
Yeah, I mean, I think, but I don't, my recollection, I guess, but just please correct me, is like, it's not like these sites are like so way far off and far behind, like, you know, that they're going, it appears, right? If all things being equal and moving forward, like they're on a good path.
I completely agree. And I think this is just baseline. I want to emphasize that, yeah. You know, and I'm sure Sue agrees that there's nowhere to go but up, and you are scoring very high in some of the definitional element areas. So yeah, I think there should be no anxiety about these scores today.
Anxiety. And then just before you move on, I just want to remind everybody about the capacity baseline tool, right? So you completed that this last year before you started it. I think it was Heather that said to me, you know, they reference that on a pretty regular basis, like looking at it, and it's kind of a helpful tool just to be like, hey, we filled it out. And so I think that's another tool that we've also, I think the funders would like to see that again, right? So there was the baseline and then again, which is reflected in the domain areas. So yeah, thanks.
Okay, so now you all may remember when we invited members of your sites to participate in something we call the structure group interview. This was done with the sites as well to capture baseline information, and I'll turn it over to Kylie Gallington, who will be presenting this section. Great, thank you, Susan.
And can you guys like maybe move the speaker? I just got a note. It is a little bit hard to hear. I don't know if you can, do you have a speaker right in front of you?
No, it's part of our computer setup that we have, but we may be able to call in Suzanne and change our audio.
And you're better, Kylie, than so just talk loud until you get in.
I'll speak up a little more.
Great.
Oh yeah, I can also move closer. You might just be viewing the top of my head though, so keep that in mind. We've kind of got this weird camera up on the wall, and it's a little bit. Okay, so here I am. Wonderful. So as Suzanne said, we wanted to speak briefly about the structure group interviews that were conducted with all of the sites starting as early as November of last year. And this was another part of our baseline data collection. So I'm going to quickly go through the background for these interviews, the methods that were used in conducting them, and then I'll present some of the results and a quick summary as well. So the structure group interviews were intended to capture broad baseline information from each Accelerator site's backbone organization, and specifically focused on site leadership information. This was a self-assessment interview, really. The intention was to ask each site to self-assess their current level of activity in some of the areas related to leadership. And we designed the interview to really include questions where we felt like we needed the sites to reach some sort of consensus in self-assessing themselves. The questions for this interview were designed based on the ACH evaluation framework, which also guided the development of the partner survey, which Suzanne just presented. And the ACH evaluation framework was developed by Desert Vista, which is the evaluation group that is overseeing the Catalyst sites. The questions that we covered included the strengths, successes, challenges, partnerships, data and analysis, and financial sustainability. And one thing that I just want to mention right now is that, you know, we told each site this during our interview. This was a baseline assessment. I know that a lot of sites felt uncomfortable with some of the questions that we were asking because, you know, frankly, you haven't made a lot of progress in those areas, but this was baseline. We didn't expect to see a lot of progress in all areas at this stage. And now that I'm presenting this to you here, it's July, a lot of this information was collected back in November, January, and so we know that some progress has probably been made since the data was collected. And as I mentioned, these structure group interviews were conducted earlier in the year, and then the partner survey, which Suzanne just presented on, was actually conducted a little bit later in the year, and that was intended to capture more broad feedback from all members of the ACH, as opposed to more of a self-assessment process that was a consensus building process. Okay, so the surveys were administered through the site leads. Site leads at each site were contacted and invited to participate in this interview. We requested that 3 to 4 participants from each site participate in the interview, and we did encourage sites to include members outside the backbone organization where possible. The interviews began in November of 2017, and some of them bled into January of 2018. We did have one that was conducted fairly late in the year in March, just due to scheduling challenges, but we were able to conduct interviews with all 9 of the Accelerator sites. The interviews were conducted as group telephone interviews with our staff here. They included a mix of qualitative and quantitative questions. And the questions were covering short-term indicators from the ACH evaluation framework, as I mentioned. Each site received a copy of the questions in advance, which we know was helpful, especially in some cases. Some sites had clearly come to the interview prepared. They had already gathered input from other relevant site leads who weren't able to participate in the phone call. So we feel like that really helped to make sure that more broad input was gathered in answering these questions. For analyzing the data, the qualitative results were analyzed in vivo just to identify key themes that came up, and the quantitative results were analyzed just to generate descriptive statistics. So as I said, all 9 Accelerator sites participated. On average, there were 3 interviewees per interview. The range was from 2 to 4 participants. Most of the site, well, not most, almost half of the sites included non-backbone individuals. So 4 out of the 9 sites. But as I mentioned before, the questions were sent in advance, and we know that in some cases, input was provided ahead of time by other individuals that are part of the leadership team. So getting into now some of the themes that arose, we asked sites to identify what are the top 3 strengths of your ACH. And within those strengths, some of the key themes that arose were to do with community characteristics. So the most common strength that was mentioned was strong collaboration and relationships within the community. One site said, the community members and organizations know each other well. There's interest and energy coming together to support the city moving forward. Another theme was a strong sense of community. Diversity was mentioned as a strength by some sites. One site said that diversity gave their community opportunities to celebrate and engage different skill sets and types of understanding. And common vision or aims within the community was also described as a strength. Also within strengths, specific community partners being part of the ACH were viewed as a strength by many communities, and specific partners that were called out in this way included higher education partners, hospitals and healthcare systems, CBOs, public health departments, and government partners. And then specific strengths that were mentioned with regard to the ACH in particular. These included strong interest and willingness to participate in the ACH, an emphasis on community engagement, and inclusion of thought leaders who can make things happen. One site said, we've been able to engage folks from a variety of different sectors, thought leaders. They will help us lead to aligned strategies in the future and provide a solid foundation for our work. Another strength that arose in the interviews was the presence of complementary initiatives that are taking place in your communities. Many of the participants in our interviews mentioned that members of the ACH were involved in other initiatives taking place in your communities. And one site explained, we're hoping to be able to assemble the existing initiatives as part of our network and produce a collective impact. Among collaborations that are currently taking place with other initiatives in your communities, some sites said that they're sharing data between other initiatives and that they see that there's partner opportunities that may emerge. So we also started talking about success during our interviews, and we asked sites what factors have contributed to your ACH's success so far. And the top factor that was key to success that was mentioned was collaboration. One site said, everyone is willing to work with each other. Partners were another common success factor. One site said, we have a passionate team of committed idealists. Everyone meets as peers in the room. Funding was a success for some sites. It was actually a challenge for other sites, depending on whether sites had been able to obtain funding beyond the CACHI period. So for sites that had been able to obtain funding, it was seen as a success. And then readiness and participation in CACHI was another factor in success. Speaking about the CACHI opportunity in particular, one site said it was an aligning of the stars, seemed like the right time. And another site said there's a lot of enthusiasm and excitement about being one of the Accelerator sites. We also asked sites what factors have hindered your ACH's progress so far. And one of the common themes was that competing priorities and commitments among ACH members is a challenge. One person said, it's like herding cats. Competing projects, priorities, and opportunities have not allowed us as much focus on the ACH work as we would have liked. And another site said, these are very busy people. Their lack of availability has hindered us. As I mentioned previously, lack of funding and resources was seen as a challenge. A couple of sites said lack of dedicated resources to plan, implement, and sustain. They had a lot of energy and momentum with the original CACHI grant, but lost some of that energy and momentum because they weren't fully funded. It's hard to have enough capacity to do the work. And then finally, lack of focus or mission creep was something that came up with some sites. One site said, so far we're keeping our eye on mission creep. We want to keep people on focus, on task, on scope. So now switching gears, we asked about community engagement, and one of the questions that we asked was, how much do you agree that community input helps prioritize your ACH's goals and strategies? So this was on a 3-point scale, and I just want to call out, many of our interviewees were frustrated that there were only 3 options here. They wanted to be able to choose slightly in between strongly agree or somewhat agree, or somewhat agree and do not agree. So we acknowledge that there is potentially that gray area, but thank you for going with us and choosing one of the numbers. So as you can see, 4 out of the 9 sites somewhat agreed that community input helps prioritize their ACH's goals and strategies. One of the sites is not included on here because they felt like this wasn't applicable to their site yet, so I just want to acknowledge that. But 3 of the sites strongly agreed that community input helps prioritize their ACH's goals and strategies. And a couple of quotes from the sites. One site said, we've held focus groups and presented some of the data to community forums and gotten feedback from the community on what they thought about that data. We've used it to help guide our processes. And another site said, we all work with community engagement and bring it back to the ACH, but it's not intentional to the ACH. We have the expertise to launch and integrate this feedback more from our partners. Also talking about community engagement, we asked sites, how much do you agree that your ACH has strategies in place for including community input in the decision-making process? And here we found that the majority of sites, 5 out of the 9, somewhat agreed that this is happening. And 2 of the sites strongly agreed that this is happening. One site said, "We want to fine tune and make this more systematic. We are looking to build more bridges with a direct advisory committee, residents and community members to get feedback on the ACH's work." We also asked sites a series of questions about financial sustainability. So we found that 1/3 of the sites have identified an organization or entity for their wellness fund. When we conducted these interviews, none of the sites had opened a bank account for the ACH's wellness fund. But 1/3 had identified sustainable funding to support the ACH beyond the CACHI grant period. And 2 of the sites felt that they had a financial sustainability strategy in place. We also asked sites, how do you plan to spend your CACHI funds? And some of the common responses were staffing, hiring consultants or paying for technical assistance, paying for convenings. One site said that they plan to spend the money on interventions, and then 3 of the sites said that they were unsure or they were still deciding. We also asked sites, what challenges have you encountered in securing funding? The most common response that we received was that explaining the value of the ACH to funders was a difficulty. So I've got a number of quotes here. One person said, "Relating to people of different sectors and backgrounds who haven't heard of it and being brief and succinct with the answer." Another person said that it was hard to sell it's hard to sell the funders on something when you don't have the vision in your head or the details of what it looks like. The collective story and materials that we could share with the funder would be helpful. We need good data, good stories, need to package this. And then another site said, clarifying our vision and our messaging. How do we message our value, return on investment? We feel like we have the potential to develop a comprehensive community strategy for health, but we have to have the vision and engagement with people that in that vision so that we can create potential for recurring revenue. Other responses with regard to challenges in securing funding, finding funding that fits the ACH model was a challenge. One person said, some of the grants we applied for have a bunch of deliverables that are not within our priorities, but it adds additional work outside of the ACH scope. And then another site said that competing with ACH partners or members for funding had become a challenge. One person said partners can end up in competition with each other in terms of grants and funding. So switching gears, we asked questions also about your site's current status with regard to data and analytics. And at that time, 4 out of the 9 sites agreed that they currently have systems in place for collecting data. 6 of the sites, two-thirds of the sites, said that they are currently using shared data from partners. And of those, 1 of the sites was using shared data to track their ACH's performance, and 2 of the sites said that they were using shared data to make decisions. A third of the sites indicated that they have identified indicators that their ACH would like to track. So with regard to data and analytics, about half of the sites felt that they were still in the planning stages with regard to data and analytics. And one site explained, although we likely have more than enough data, we need a data governance structure and a system to share data. Plans are in place to develop these. So in summary, we learned a lot. The interviews that we conducted were very insightful, and we hope that this was a good process as well for the interviewees to self-reflect and see where your ACH is currently at. What we heard was that collaborations and partners are key to success. We heard that securing funding is a challenge. We heard that more work is needed to develop systems for collecting and using data. And we also heard that technical assistance with communication strategies was needed. And I know that Sue has been working to make technical assistance with regard to communication strategies available to the site. So we hope that some progress has been made in that area. So with that, I wanted to briefly talk about logic models. I think Suzanne briefly mentioned we will be sending all of the sites later today your results from the partner surveys as well as the structured group interviews. And we're also going to be sending each site a draft logic model. So this is a sample logic model. This is more or less what the logic model that you'll receive from us looks like. Our intent was to provide a customized logic model to each ACH site. And this is based on the ACH evaluation framework. The intention for this logic model is to provide a big picture overview of the operations of the ACH and what it should be working toward. So we populated these logic models with information about each site using information that was collected in the structured group interviews as well as notes from technical assistance calls. But that said, I want to mention that what you'll be receiving from us is very much what we consider to be a draft. There will be some boxes on the logic model that are kind of grayed out, where we are highlighting to you if this needs more information. We want this to be helpful. We're hoping that this logic model could be a tool that you can use in speaking with partners and communicating what the ACH is about. So above all else, this is intended to be something that will be helpful, and we want to customize it for you to make it helpful. So that said, what we're sending you is really just something to chew on to get the conversation started. And our hope is that after receiving the logic model, you'll follow up with our team to schedule a time to talk about the logic model and get it revised and finalized so that it's reflective of the activity that's going on at your site. So our team is available for technical assistance on this, and we encourage you to take advantage of that. And then Suzanne, did you have more you wanted to add?
I did just want to say again, thank you so much for participating in our data collection activities that we just reported to you. We know sometimes as the evaluators, you are so busy, and we really want to make sure that we collect data that's meaningful and that's going to be useful to show the progress that you're making at each site, and then also to evaluate this entire CACHI initiative that is a new thing that we're doing in California. So we are very thankful for you taking time out of your busy day to help us with the data, and we look forward to working with you to help customize the logic models and answer any questions you have about the data we send today.
So thank you, Suzanne and Kylie. So just one question, I just want to clarify. So, because you're all going to get this data today, in your mailboxes. So will you be setting up times with each one of them, or do they only contact, like, is there just an appointment only if they're looking for additional information around the logic model? I just want to be clear on that next step piece. Sorry if I missed it.
We would prefer if people reach out to us directly.
Okay.
I will be sending the email, so please just let her know if you'd like to set up time to talk with us.
Okay. Because one thing, I guess, to the group, so I'd like for you to just speak up or put it in the chat, like your experience with logic models. If some of you, it's new, and some of you might be more seasoned. I don't know, I'd like to just hear or put in the chat box, like your thought, because I just feel like since, there's a different group, there may be some that might need more, like, what is this, as compared to others, right? But I don't know that. So Tiffany, Christina, and I seasoned and have trained. Okay, Sue, well, there you go. Very good. So it looks like we've got some pros here in the group. Same here. Great. So
we're open to your feedback too.
And Nicole is happy, and she's familiar. She's happy and familiar. That's good. If you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. So very good. Great.
Great.
Okay, well, thanks.
Okay, so are there any questions or?
Nicole just said, but sometimes they seem to map to the process after the fact rather than providing direction. It just depends. So, yeah. I like theory of changes better. I know we've talked about this before. That's another tool I think that can be helpful, and maybe sometimes it's less, I'm going to use the word prescriptive, but anyway, yeah, questions, you guys? And I imagine once you get the information, you may have questions, and so you know that you can contact them. So, great. Yeah, anything else? Okay.
On our end. So as Suzanne said, we just want to thank you for participating today. Here's our contact information. So you'll be receiving an email from me directly this afternoon with all of these reports that we've just mentioned and a logic model. And you can just reply directly to me if you have questions or if you would like to follow up to set up a time to speak.
Great. Thanks, you guys.
All right.
Thank you,
Thank
everybody.
you.